Welcome back, folks. Here we are with our next lecture. Last time we were talking sort of about the origins of care ethics. And in order to really find the origins and understand that regarding care ethics, we need to look at the role traditionally in Western philosophy that the emotions and the passions, the desires, whatever you want to call them, has had in relationship to philosophy and morality. As we saw, it's very contrary to morality, ethics, and rationality. It's deemed as somewhat lesser. Consequently, also, a lot of philosophers have historically been rather sexist and relegate emotions and the passions and the sentiments over to the gender of women, to women. And they've traditionally associated masculinity with reason, or reason with masculinity, and emotion with femininity. We did see some people sort of go against this, namely with David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, and Richard Rorty, the American philosopher. As we saw with Gilligan and Noddings, we saw sort of the beginning of care ethics. Gilligan applied most of that, or saw care ethics mostly as a psychological theory, going against Lawrence Kohlberg, her former mentor. And Nodding saw it mostly as an ethical approach, contrasting it with principle-based ethics or justice-based ethics, according to her. Where we are today, we're going to go ahead and try to get to the core ideas of care ethics. As we should know by this point, and especially if you start doing the reading, care ethics is very interested in, namely, caring actions and caring attitudes. And it takes the idea that caring is integral to being not only a morally good person, but also doing the morally correct actions. So relationships are going to be very central to it, as is a lot of psychology, the psychology that you feel when you develop these close relationships. And contrary to them being obstacles, they're actually going to be morally informative, according to care ethics. They're going to inform and tell you something about morality. So with that said, let's go ahead and start up with our slides here. So Stephanie Collins, she is an Australian philosopher. I think she's in Melbourne. Yes, she's in the University of Monash University and Melbourne. And basically she says, look, care ethics is relatively new and people disagree what exactly it is, but I think I can identify the four core claims, the four main ideas of care ethics. So according to her, it has four main ideas. The first one is that moral deliberation should include sympathy and direct attendance to concrete real-life situations, as opposed to very abstract situations. 2, valuable relationships ought to be treated as moral paradigms or as typical moral examples. B, value preserved or promoted or formed. And C, acknowledged as giving rise to weighty duties. Especially with this one, the second claim, basically the idea here is that your relationships or your obligations to someone that you have a very close relationship to, those obligations to someone that you have a close relationship to will be greater than your obligations to a stranger. As we're going to see, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything regarding strangers, but still, regarding someone you loved and care deeply for versus a total stranger, your obligations for the loved one are going to be greater, as we're going to see. 3, the third claim is that people should have caring attitudes towards others. We should care about how the other person and our relationship with them is going, and we'll get more into that. And 4, people should perform caring actions that are performed under the intention of fulfilling the interest of another person, friend, loved one, or even stranger. So let's go ahead and sort of unpack each of these claims a bit more so we can understand what care ethics really would entail of us if we were to adopt care ethics. So claim 1, moral deliberation should include sympathy and direct attendance to concrete situations. Here, sympathy means something very specific according to care ethicists. So it means appreciating someone else's situation from their perspective and being moved to help them because of what one sees from that perspective. That means that we imagine ourselves being in their shoes while we also are them. So sometimes people do this and say, if I were you, I would do this. Or if I were in your situation, I would do this, right? Sometimes people say, if I were in your situation, I would do this. But that's not really what sympathy is. Sympathy is, if I were in your situation, and if I were you with your history, your values, your way of growing up, your experiences, your hardships, your emotions, your relationships to other people. If I was in your situation and I was you, this is what I would do. That is what sympathy is. Not what you personally would do in that situation or that setting if you were in their shoes, but what you would do if you were in their situation and you were them. So that is what sympathy is according to care ethics. And according to care ethics, sympathy is actually going to be greater than or more useful than rationality. Sympathy is going to better equip you to understand the perspective of other people and remove the self-interested goggles. And really, that is a big part of what ethics is, right? Not only considering your perspective or the perspective that interests you, but trying to consider as many perspectives as possible and trying to be fair in that way. Sympathy, that emotion and that imagining, right? That placing one's psyche in a different situation, that's going to help you with that, according to care ethicists. And really, rationality may not be that useful at the end of the day. So we consider the idea of a psychopath, right? And how psychopaths can be very rational and very intelligent, but they lack empathy and they lack emotion. If a child, they tell us, if a child is drowning in the river, then sitting down by the riverbank to stroke one's chin and ruminate on a particular thought-provoking passage from Immanuel Kant's The Metaphysics of Morals is not justifiable. So trying to be very, very rational in those type of situations is not going to get you very far. What you need in those situations is not to be more rational, but to be more sympathetic and move in that moment. So at this point, you might have an objection. You're saying that we shouldn't be rational, that we shouldn't use any principles, but we have to use rationality. We can't be dumb. We can't just be emotional, dumb people, the objection might go. But there is a response to this, according to Collins, right? The response is something like, relax, calm down. We're not saying that rationality shouldn't be used at all, but we're just saying that rationality should take a second seat when it comes to understanding other people and being moved to do the morally correct thing. Sympathy is going to be more useful than rationality. That doesn't mean we shouldn't use rationality, because rationality a lot of times can be compatible with sympathy, and it can also inform sympathy, tell it how to get to what you want, right? Kind of similar, going back to David Hume, right? The passions tell you what you want, and you want to have the right passions of sympathy and compassion, and the rationality can help you sort of get there instrumentally. It's sort of the navigation to your destination, but the destination is informed by your passions and emotions. And finally, they do mention that sometimes if your sympathies, if your emotions are misplaced, that rationality can overrule sympathy. However, most of the time, sympathy will be the better guide, according to care ethicists. We are arguing for more sympathy in deliberation, not absolute or categorical sympathy. And really sort of contrast that with sort of Immanuel Kant's view, right? Immanuel Kant's view is very, very emotional phobic, and they don't allow for any emotion. This one's just saying we're still allowing for rationality, but we think emotion and sympathy should come first. That's actually what's going to make you a moral person, not being very logical. Claim 2. Valuable relations ought to be treated as moral paradigms, that is, typical examples of one's morality, value preserved or promoted and formed. And C, acknowledged as giving rise to weighty moral duties. Again, favoritism is allowed, partiality is allowed, and encouraged, actually. This accords with common sense and psychology. For example, a lot of you folks, if you were in the trolley problem and one person tied to the track was your loved one, your mom, and the other 5 people were strangers, a lot of you folks will probably choose to save your mom or your loved one as opposed to 5 strangers. Now, Immanuel Kant, maybe even Aristotle, and especially John Stuart Mill would say that that is unreasonable and that's morally wrong to have that type of favoritism. But care ethics would say, no, not only is that not morally wrong, not only is that permissible, but that's morally correct. If you didn't save your mom or your loved one, we would think less of you, morally speaking. We would think that you are maybe a bad son or a bad loved one. Think of it this way, right? If you saw, let's make it completely even. If you saw one person drowning and they were your child, and we saw another person drowning and they were somebody else's child, you wouldn't say, oh, I need to be fair according to the moral law, and you would flip a coin. Or maybe you would, I don't know. But chances are a lot of you would choose to save your child because you have a relationship with them. If you only, again, assuming you only had time to save one person. In fact, if you stopped and flipped a coin and said, okay, I need to give both children an equal chance, including my child and the stranger's child, then if you save the stranger's child, the stranger might be thankful, but they might be a little confused as to why you saved their child as opposed to your own child. In fact, a lot of people will probably think of you as being morally deficient and thinking that you're a bad parent, that you really should have saved your child as opposed to the stranger's child. So, they gave us an example too, Collins. They say, imagine a person who does not visit his lonely mother in the rest home despite living nearby. That doesn't cost them very much. We think that, this might indicate a general moral ineptitude. And sometimes people say this, right? If you want to maybe be best friends or be spouses, get married to someone, you can see how they treat their mother or their father, someone that's close to them. If they treat their mother very poorly and they expect them to always do the cooking and the cleaning and do everything for them and be kind of their servant and doesn't really attend to their moral needs and emotional needs, then that might be representative. That might be a typical example of their morality and how they would treat you if you were to enter a relationship with them. B, we also think that he has more reason to value, preserve, or promote his relationship with his mother than his relationship with others, with other lonely rest home residents. And finally, his responsibility to visit his mother are weightier than any such responsibility he might have to other lonely residents. Sure, he might have some responsibility to visit other people, other strangers, but still the responsibility to his mom is going to be greater. Objection 2. You might be saying, well, if it's all about relationships and promoting them, what about toxic and abusive relationships, physically or emotionally abusive? And secondly, what of distant, needy strangers? Should we not help them just because we don't have a relationship with them? And there is a response to this, right? So they say, look, the value of potential relationships, so real life as well as potential relationships, is determined by both subjective, what you yourself personally think about the relationship. So if you're in a toxic relationship, you might have subjective value and think that it's good for you, even though it might not. So it's determined by subjective values as well as objective factors. Is it actually good for you? Does it actually help you flourish as a human being? Or are they, in a sense, kind of manipulating you and pulling you away from all your other loved ones and hobbies? And is that objectively, for your mental health, toxic and abusive? Those will be the objective factors. And again, the subjective factors do factor into it somewhat, but it's mostly going to be the objective factors according to care ethicists. So relationships with abusers are going to have no objective value whatsoever. So that's going to basically make it so that those type of relationships should be either not promoted at all or promoted to a much lesser extent than other relationships. We might say, and furthermore, relationships with distant needy strangers, those are potential relationships, and care ethics does also account for potential relationships. Notice it says, right, that relationships should be formed as well as promoted. So your relationship with someone across the world might be morally valuable to you because then you understand what people across the world are going through and what their hardships are. And it might be more morally valuable to them because then they get to see that what you yourself are going through and maybe your amount of sympathy and the amount of cooperation, collaboration that can be had at the global stage. So here's claim 3. People should have caring attitudes towards others. That is, we should care about how the other and their relationship with them is going. A caring attitude, more specifically, to care, according to Collins, to care about someone, something, someplace, or sometime is for it to matter to you and for your emotions, desires, decisions, and attention to be influenced by how you believe things are going with it. You can care about your mom, poverty, human rights, public libraries, the future. You can care about a bunch of different things, so long as human needs, and human interests are tied with that thing you're caring about, either directly or indirectly. These attitudes, according to care ethicists, are morally valuable. It's morally valuable to have caring attitudes. It's good. It's morally valuable in 2 ways, as we're going to see, instrumentally as well as sort of intrinsically. They give the example of Frank, an aged father who's very old, very senile, and doesn't have a lot of bodily autonomy or bodily strength anymore, and they need help cleaning their home. So Sean volunteers to help their father because they love their father, and Wanda doesn't volunteer, is paid to help Frank clean his home as well. Now, Sean's caring attitude is instrumentally valuable, right? Because they have that caring attitude, they might give better attention to detail. They might be better motivated to see things that other people won't be able to see. They might be able to understand that, oh, my dad can't reach this cereal up here, so I'm going to go ahead and put it down here when I'm cleaning and tidying up for them. But it also has non-instrumental value as well. Mainly, it doesn't just help you perform better in the moment, help you motivate you to do the morally correct action. It also is valuable, even if it doesn't help you consequentially, because it signifies something very special. It signifies how much Sean loves his dad. And that is valuable, not for any instrumental reason, but just in and of itself. This, of course, doesn't say, it's not trying to say that Wanda's caring, that her labor is not valuable. Labor is valuable. She is still doing labor, right? She should be getting paid for that because labor is valuable. But for our case here among care ethicists, it's less morally valuable. And that's okay. Objection 3. You might say, you can't call me an immoral person for not having caring attitudes. You might say that I personally myself can't bother myself to care. I can't voluntarily control my attitudes. The reply is, it's a little tough, the reply. Tough love. They say, we can. We actually can most of the time control our attitudes. We do this by consciously attending to the reasons we have to care about something, downplaying the reasons against caring about the thing, or simply acting as if we do care until we actually do, faking it until we actually make it. And if this truly, truly is impossible, we can place ourselves into situations, settings, and behaviors that will likely then give rise to caring attitudes. So if you really just don't give a damn about poverty, for instance, you might want to place yourself in a soup kitchen or maybe in some type of charity where you can see the effects of poverty taking place so that you are more likely to have that caring attitude arise within you. So you place yourself in situations where those emotions can arise. That's what the response says. Claim 4. People should perform caring actions. So we talked about caring attitudes, now we're talking about caring actions that are performed under the intention of fulfilling the interest of another person, friend, loved one, or even stranger. So morally valuable caring actions promote or enhance the interest of someone and have the effect of actually doing so. So the intention is to promote it, but you also need to have the effect in order for it to be morally valuable. You can't just intend to help them, but the effect is not there. The impact, the effect is just as, if not more important than the intention, according to care ethicists. So, for example, they give the example of a boy caring for his pet rock, and it's just the rock that he found outside, and he thinks that the rock has attitudes and interests and needs. And this is a caring attitude, or caring action, from the boy, but it's not morally valuable because the effect is not meaningful. The effect means, or in effect, there is no interest or need being met because the rock doesn't have any interests or needs. It's an inanimate object. It's a rock. It doesn't have a mind. So here's finally the last objection. Won't this lead to paternalism? If you're saying that we should promote the needs and interests of other people, won't this lead to situations where someone will do things for you that you yourself don't want, saying that it promotes your interests? We can imagine, for instance, a mom telling their daughter to dress appropriately, to wear dresses, to put on makeup, and maybe even to, if they're being fat phobic, to lose weight in order to find a husband when the daughter doesn't really care about marrying, maybe not ever, maybe not in the moment. And there's the reply. The interests of a person are tied to their needs, and some needs are higher and some are lower, and the higher ones, often but not always, these interests will be determined by matters of autonomy. That is, what they themselves endorse and decide. Autonomy and independence are important, and that's going to determine which needs are higher, just them choosing that they want this. A lot of the times. Sometimes people will choose things that are bad for them, objectively bad for them, and that should be taken into account as well, of course. So here's the takeaway. Care ethics is an often overlooked ethical system. We've talked about virtue ethics, deontology, as well as utilitarianism, but I want to give you folks a fourth option, of course. It's a lot more emotional. Probably the closest one to it is virtue ethics. Again, according to Collins, it has 4 core claims. Sympathy is very important to it. Relationships are very important to it. And finally, caring attitudes and caring actions are very important to it. These four things are what it's all about, according to Collins. The takeaway is that although it has its roots as a feminine approach to ethics, according to Collins, or, depending on whether you ask Gilligan or Noddings, it's a feminine approach to ethics or a feminine voice to ethics, whatever you want to call it. Care ethicists, for the most part today, claim that all people of all genders would benefit and would become morally better people by adopting care ethics. So, the question I leave you folks with, right, is how does this system compare to other systems? Or sorry, the questions I leave you with is how does this system compare to other systems? What would a care ethicist do in the trolley problem, prime, where the loved one is tied to the track and there's 5 strangers on the other track? What would they do in lifeboat ethics, the lifeboat problem? And do you agree or not? Now that we're pretty much near the end of our unit on ethics, we've looked at 4 different ethical systems. Which one appeals to you the most and why? Okay, with that said, folks, that is it for today, and I'll see you folks next time. Bye-bye.